Welcome to the Joy Punk Podcast. I am Janelle Etzel, your host. My guest today has been through fire and come out the other side. Jessie Burke is partner and CEO of the Society Hotel brand. Her hotels are major tourist destinations here in Oregon, and her current locations are in Portland, Oregon's Old Town neighborhood and in Bingen, Washington, in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. Her hotel in Old Town Portland is located in an area of our city that has been what you could probably only describe as neglected and ravaged in the past few years. Rather than watch it happen or abandon the heart of our city, as many chose to do, she decided to stay and fight. She used her influence not just to fight for her business's recovery, but that of her entire neighborhood and our city. As chair of the Old Town Community Association, Jessie Burke sprang into action to save her neighborhood. Jessie, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I feel so grateful towards you for being a leader here in our community. There's just been so much blame the last few years. People are just want to point at someone, right or wrong. And I'm really moved by you and the others that just kind of stepped up and took responsibility. It's very punk rock. It's like, well, the establishment's not doing anything, so I guess it's up to me. So you are definitely, in my mind, the most punk rock business leader in Portland of all time. And before we dive into your recent work with helping Old Town and the city's rebuilding, I thought it'd be really interesting for our listeners just to hear a little bit of your backstory and how you got to Portland in the first place. And how does someone get to own a hotel? There's so many things to unpack here. So I think one of the coolest things that I know about you is that in your early life, you worked your way to a college scholarship through fencing.
Yes. And actually in fencing, college is a step down. So in a lot of sports, like football, you play in high school and college is the next step up and then you go pro. Really, I think for most fencers, knowing that I was on the U.S. team for 10 years and then sort of my retirement plan was to go to college on a scholarship. My father became paralyzed when I was 6 and we were very poor. I would say sort of as a result, he had, been working full time and my mother was staying home and he developed a nerve disease and this was before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you couldn't get disability for those types of injuries at the time. And so we moved in with my mother's sister and she traded childcare for housing. So my father wasn't working. My mother is watching children for housing, but no money, which I try to sort of explain as like sharecropping, where like you don't get any money. You just like trade it for trade in the company store. So you can't make any decisions. Like, I'm going to save some of this. So there's really just no money. And our parents were like, you all have to become good at something if you want to get out, which was essentially out of poverty. So I had no obvious athletic skill. There's actually a funny story about that I'll tell you in a second. But my brother was super athletic. I mean, like he played soccer. He got a full ride for soccer. He was being recruited to compete internationally. And they're like videos, home movies of me. My brother's doing everything. He's younger than me. He's like on a skateboard and he's running track. And I like walk by the home movie and I've got like Twizzlers hanging down my ears, like awkwardly coming out of the frame. And my dad took me to there was an ad in the library newspaper for fencing. And I did pretty well. I did quit for a brief time because I didn't know you were supposed to wear this protective plate as a woman on your chest. It was really painful. And I was like, the sport is terrible. I need to quit because I was starting puberty. And then they were like, actually, you just need to wear this breastplate. It's actually not that painful.
Things you don't know.
Yeah. So I stayed after that. I continued to do well. We went to some other clubs and then I won my first national competition. It was like an under 15 national event. And my father asked me, I think I was 13, and he said, what do you want to do with this? So this is in 1992. And I said, I want to make the 96 Olympic team. He's like, okay, well, you got to go. and they shipped me up to upstate New York. And I'd never lived with my parents again. At around 12, I left and fenced at the Rochester Fencing Center. I lived with families and then like had my own apartment when I was 16 and was traveling abroad like every other weekend for World Cups. And I made my first national team when I was 16. So I competed on the U.S. teams until I went to college, and then the national team is like the top 8 in the country. So I was going to World Cups for about 10 years doing that. And then I went to college. I didn't understand how college worked because, I was raising myself. So I called Stanford and Penn State, who had the top 2 fencing clubs. I knew the coaches, so I called the coaches in May. And I was like, hey, can I come to your college in August? And they were like, Stanford was like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Yeah.
No, you can come next year. Because it's sort of like having a golden ticket. Like it's one of the only Ivy League sports. I didn't totally know what I was doing, but Penn State was like, come on down. We have rolling admissions. So I went to Penn State and the rest is history there.
Just this piece of your history alone, I have so many questions. And one, was that where your love of hotels began? You must have been staying in a lot of hotels.
I did stay in a lot of hotels. Everyone's like, oh, you're so lucky. You've traveled so much. And I was like, yeah, I've seen every airport and gymnasium and hotel in every city, but I actually spent very little time in those cities. A funny story I was going to tell you is my coach, Michael Marks, who is from Oregon actually originally, but he was teaching in New York. He's like a 5-time Olympian, super successful. He coaches to this day. And he asked me years later, he's like, can I write an article in like the U.S. Fencing magazine about sort of the process of taking you on as a student? Because he was doing it for several people. So I was like, sure. And he showed a photo of his notebook. It says Jesse Burke, no obvious talent. I was like, Jesus Christ, Mike, like, I didn't know you wrote that about me.
No obvious talent,
yeah.
but it must be, but like, he must have been willing to take you on because like works real hard.
I don't even know if that's true. Fencing's a weird sport. I think that they call it physical chess. So like, if you're really strategic and like kind of fast, then you can probably do pretty well. It's changed a lot since I did it, but I was very strategic and I'm kind of fast.
And you continue to be very, very strategic.
Yeah, I actually think that's the only common thread in my whole life. So I met my husband on my recruiting trip to Penn State. He asked me to dance at a swing dance because my fencing coach had been a swing dancing instructor and Jonathan's mother had been a swing dancing instructor. And we both went to this dance and I didn't have anyone to dance with and he didn't either. Anyway, so I end up going to Penn State and I changed my major 7 times. And Jonathan was like, what do you even want to do for a living? And I was like, I want to do whatever the hell I want to do all the time, which is essentially you have to be an entrepreneur. So I don't think nothing was ever really in the cards. I have always just been perpetually interested in everything all the time. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, so you've gone to Penn State. You're 7 different majors. What between there and Portland transpired that brought you?
Yeah.
What brought you to Portland?
I ended up studying teaching. I was an education major, and Jonathan, my husband, was an aerospace engineer, and he really wanted to get into alternative energy because his options he was finding were going to be to build spaceships or bombs, and he wasn't interested in either of those. And so I actually left before I was able to graduate before finishing my student teaching, and we came out here because he had visited when he was living in California for a time. And he just really loved the landscape. I thought I was going to New York City, but we came to Oregon instead. It's totally the same. It's the same kind of place.
Yeah. The New York Times writes about both places the same amount.
Yeah. And so he ended up starting a solar contracting company, and I was working in social work. I was education coordinator at the Native American Youth and Family Center. And then I went to graduate school for public administration and strategic planning. And, I kind of just bopped around for a bit. I interned at Prosper Portland for a little while. And then while I was writing my thesis, I got a temp job at an investment banking firm. And I mean, these guys were crazy and they were like pretty mean and they were drinking Pepto-Bismol all the time because they were always stressed. And I asked them, I was like, so what is the difference between what you do and someone just guessing in the stock market? And they're like, well, theoretically, like our education, we would be able in the long run to be ahead. And I was like, well, why do you drink Pepto-Bismol then? But I think I was really annoying to them. I just had like a million questions of like why people do what they do. And I said, why do you do this job? Because, it's on East Coast time, the stock market. So they were at work at 4 a.m. and oftentimes they would stay until 7 p.m. And I was like, so why do you do this? And they were like, for money and power. And I was like, and I had just left interning at a public sector entity where the sense I got was that people were saying they were there for the greater good, but it felt like they were using it as a stepping stone to run for public office. It was hard for me to see because I felt like it was really disingenuous. And I think I care a lot about people telling the truth and people owning their stuff. And like, if you want to do something, just acknowledge that. And I don't like it when it feels like people actually have other motives. So like when I was fencing during the 96 Olympic trials, there was an older woman on our team who they only take the top 4 to go to the Olympics. And if you're the host country, you're guaranteed a team. So usually it's the top ranked country per continent. But if you're the host country, and 96 was in Atlanta, and she was paying athletes from poorer countries who had no chance of making their country's team to lose on purpose. And we were watching it. It was like on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and they were asking us, is this happening? Yes. Can you prove it? We're like, well, do you get receipts for bribery? No. And that was really hard for me because I was like, I can only compete on results. Like my family doesn't have any money. And so that was sort of my first experience in people being sort of disingenuous about their motives and sort of winning without really winning. And so then kind of observing stuff in the public sector was kind of painful to see. And then I worked at this investment banking firm and they just told me the truth. And even if it was an ugly truth, they still told me the truth.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I was like, I think I have to work in the private sector because even though my heart is for the greater good, I'll bet I can do more good in the private sector just because it's what I want to do, not because it's my profession. So that's how I ended up being like, I just have to be private sector for the rest of my life and volunteer to do stuff for the greater good. So my husband started his solar contracting company, Imagine Energy, and I helped him for a little while. I had my first child around then too. And then I told him that I would be really resentful if I didn't get to do what I wanted to do, AKA open my own business, which was Posies. And so
as a cafe in the Kenton neighborhood.
That's right. Yeah. Posies Bakery and Cafe. And my mother was a pastry chef. She'd gone back to school in her 40s and become a pastry chef in DC. And she was having a really hard time. She was working at Sofitel in DC, which is a French hotel chain. And she was having a really hard time with the new head chef. And I was like, hey, I'm going to do this thing. I'll make it a bakery too if you want to come out here. And she was like, Jessie, I've never lived anywhere else. And I know she's totally driven by guilt. So I was like, well, I already told everyone you're coming, so you better get out here.
And I have a grandkid for you. Come on now.
And I know she doesn't always make rational decisions. So I had to like force the issue through guilt. And she did come out and I tell everyone there's the business and there's the talent. And I've always felt she was the talent and I was the business. So like she would, everyone loves her product. And then she would feel like shameful about something she made. So she'd go change the prices to be like 50 cents. And I went out one day. People always ask like, are you good with like differentiation and like working with people you're related to? And I'm like, yes. I threatened to fire my mother because she kept changing the prices. And I said, if you touch the prices one more time, you're fired because I have to keep us open. So that was the first business. That was in 2009. And about 2013, a friend reached out and asked if we would be ever interested in hotels. And Jonathan was like, we're like so busy. I don't think so. Let me ask Jesse. And at this point in Kenton, I wasn't like really needed front of house. And I spent most of my time just like started the Kenton Street Fair, and I had started the business association up, and I used to like go around and fill out everyone's paperwork for Prosper Portland grants.
And let's get this money into our neighborhood.
I would just fill it in and be like, just sign right here. I'll get you some money. And I would fax all of them because faxing was the way, right?
Yeah.
I would fax everything and
carry your pigeon.
Yeah. And I would like meet them at the signings to like make sure it happened. And I really enjoyed that kind of work to like kind of see the economic and community development with just like one person focused on it. And so our friend, I was like, well, where are you thinking? And he said in Chinatown. And it's another TIF district, tax increment financing district for Prosper Portland. And I was like, well, I've already played that game a bit. And my mom's side of the family is Chinese. So I think this could be an interesting endeavor. It wasn't any particular passion for hotels, but also I don't have any particular passion for bakeries and coffee shops either. I think that I just am really fascinated by business and how you can systematize it and make it something that people really love and care about. And then use, leverage that into like doing things for the greater good. People are like, oh, this person can do this and still has time to like help all of these people. Like, I should do that too.
Yeah.
So that's how the hotels came to be. Was my only requirement for my businesses is that there's a coffee shop in it, because I drink a lot of coffee.
There
So
you go.
you'll notice all of my businesses have coffee associated with it.
The hotel, I took a tour early on of the Society Hotel for folks who haven't been there, and it was LEED certified, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean the architect, like the things that were happening with design and architecture and the care in the building. I remember touring through. One of my real estate partners also owns hotels, and we went to go look at it as kind of inspiration for when we're starting a project. And I remember thinking, how the hell they make this pencil? And the quality and the choices that you made there, and there's so much integrity throughout. It's just a really incredible project. It's so beautiful. It seems like the Society Hotel had, was booked. You had a lot of momentum. And what happened during the pandemic? What was that like, going from we're up, we're running, we've been operating for a while, to no one's traveling?
Yeah. Well, to your question of how do you get it to pencil, there are almost no cost of goods in hotels. That's when I tell people about food service versus hotels. In food service, they're eating the whole thing you just gave them. And so you have to go buy all of those things again. Whereas hotels, you're reusing the linens. The only thing that is consumable in the room is soap. Right. And so if you eliminate the cost of goods over time, it does well. And so really you're just in the linen maintenance department. It's a much better return on investment than food.
Yeah.
But as far as the momentum, yes, Portland was sort of the darling of, the New York Times at the time, and kind of, with a lot of Asia and the East Coast. And we had a lot of success with our PR plan starting, and it went really fast. Like, I think it was profitable after 2 months, which is not anything any of us have ever experienced before. And, we were in it so 2020 would have been, we hadn't hit 5 years. November would be 5 years. And I remember we had an owners meeting in March. I was like, so 80% of our reservations have been canceled. I think that something very real is happening. And with the staff, I remember having 2 staff meetings because everyone was getting really scared and they didn't know what to do. And I told them, I was like, do not pay any of your bills. You save your money for food. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why everyone is handling it this way. And like you really need leadership to be confident so that the populace is confident.
Yeah.
And everyone seemed rattled, which is fine, but like you can't show it. Right. And so
Yeah.
it was really scaring them. And so I was like, that was sort of the first moment that I knew that Jonathan and I had to be the confident ones for them because they were really scared. And, you know, I work with a lot of really young people. They're in their mid 20s, early 20s. And so I said, you know, you guys can come to our house every day for dinner if you want, if you're nervous. A lot of them didn't know how to cook meals. And I was like, do not pay any bills yet. Your landlord will forgive you. Your utilities will forgive you. Just save your money for food. And so even before like worrying about losing everything with the business, I was worried about these kids like not knowing how to navigate something like this. And then I worried about the business closing.
Yeah.
So we actually closed the Portland location for a period of time. Bingen was only open on weekends. And, you know, then we just sort of switched into like, I don't know if it was desperation mode. It was like crisis management where banks didn't even know
Yeah.
how it was going. They called us and they were like, so is this like 2008? So you're about 30% down. And we were like, we're 98% down. And that we were the ones to inform the bank because they didn't have any data. And then, you know, they're rolling out the EIDL stuff and the PPP stuff and a lot of those policy things. That's the first moment I got involved in national politics. I was like, I don't think there are any business owners in Congress. You're not writing these the way like, so PPP you have to use in 8 weeks. There are no customers. What are we doing? Like, so everyone just sits on the couch. And so just kind of having to explain some of these things. I spent a lot of time on the phone with Senator Wyden's office. And, you know, I remember the first thing one of his staff said was, you know, Senator Wyden's really holding Congress's feet to the fire. And it felt initially like a little political, like, just so you know, we're fighting the Republicans. And I went crazy. And I was like, I don't care about politics.
Yeah.
There are people that are starving. I said, there is a business 1 block from me that is living on $113 a week, and he has children. I do not care about Republicans or Democrats in this moment. What are you doing? What are you going to do? Because, I mean, there was a moment where you could get early access to a loan. You could get early access if you were in a low-income neighborhood based on census data. And our census data in Old Town, where almost everyone that lives there lives on the sidewalk, our census data is lumped with the Pearl and Nob Hill. And I wrote to the SBA and I was like, are you kidding me? And they were like, I'm sorry. It's just the way the census was tracked. And like, I always copied all the businesses in the neighborhood. So they either knew what was going on or so that they could fight too. And a lot of them were writing like, you're teaching us how this is working. Like, I don't know what is going on and how this works. So like, thanks for fighting this other fight that I didn't even know needed to be fought. And at the same time, we were trying to exit our business partnership. We decided it wasn't going to work with all of us together. And so we had said, you buy us out, we'll buy you out, or you're in charge for the foreseeable future, because we had been operating it. And so they took over for, I think, 2 months. And in that time, it was about the time of the protests too. And we weren't sure if we would have a business anymore. So we started this other entity called Equity Development Lab. And I was like, how do you actually move the needle for marginalized communities? And I'm like rolling around on my office chair, like trying to think about what it would look like. And I was like, I think it's land ownership and really deep technical assistance of like in general, I hate technical assistance because I've gone and I'm like, I somehow know more than the person that is providing me with assistance. But the deep technical assistance is like, we're going to finish this business plan today. We're not leaving until it's done. And we're going to finish this pro forma today. And we go to the bank with people and we sit and finish taxes with people until they are done, not until the time is up. So we We started doing that, and we don't tell anyone. It was all word of mouth. Some of our first clients were Sydney McCarthy from Drink My May, and then Amir Morgan, who has Barnes and Morgan. And starting from scratch and building this, and then people would just refer other people to us. And that's how we met Cyrus Coleman and Wale Agbula, who bought the Enterprise building. They were looking for space. And I was like, well, at this amount of space, you could buy a building and it would be cheaper than renting it. And so I helped them buy the building. And that was all happening while our other partners were like, are we going to run this thing or not? And then when they tried to reopen the Portland hotel, I had said, you need to give the staff 3 weeks to prepare the building. Like, we don't know what COVID means for tourism anymore or travel. And the staff, it's a pretty jarring experience to come back into the world. So give them 3 weeks. Then some of the staff started calling me because they saw on Instagram on a Monday that they were opening on Friday. And the partners hadn't called any of the staff yet. And they were like, am I fired? Are we reopening? Like, what's going on? And I was like, you're going to have to call the guys. I'm not in charge right now. So we had a meeting with all the staff to try and reopen, and everyone was crying. And after that meeting, they signed the sale paperwork.
They were like, that hotel here, you have it.
Yes. So, and it was a brutal process, but we did it. And so by the end of 2020, we were the sole owners of the hotel. And we had, been working with all of these young entrepreneurs to kind of, what are some other ways that we can both help marginalized communities, help rebuild the city and Old Town, like, who's not scared to be here is young people. Young people are not afraid, And so it just became a lot of inventing things to try and save ourselves.
Most people listening to this, most people know in their heart of hearts that, we go back to dealing with the pandemic was more than most of us could handle. And then there was homeschooling, and you have 3 kids. And, all of these things, you've got a bakery, of course, that's being closed down. Like, all of these things. And then you were also pretty much abandoned by the city of Portland. Old Town, we're going to stop patrolling. We're going to stop responding to crime calls. I can't imagine the anger that I would feel, the frustration. I feel that all the time here in the Central East Side at times. I can't get people to respond, or my girls were attacked in a car and it took 20 minutes for police to answer the phone. How did you move from anger to action? Or for you, do you like, are you human? Do you feel that anger? Like, what was that like?
I do. I think that I have a tendency to, I'm really bad at hiding my feelings. So I don't. I wrote tons of letters to them, like, not just the city. I think a lot of people don't understand all the various parts of government and what they're responsible for. And at this point, I know way too much about all the parts of government.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember one of my first letters was to everyone on city council. And I said, I need to understand what's the plan and who's in charge. Because from what I can tell, there is no plan and no one's in charge. I work in like building teams and healthy teams and functional teams. And one of the books I use in training is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. You guys have all 5 of these. I've attached a digital copy of the book. Please read this. I'm happy to facilitate a training.
For your reference on how fucked up you all are.
Well, and I didn't hear back. And then I wrote the same thing to the county. And I didn't hear back. And then I wrote something publicly I think it was like around Thanksgiving. This heartbroken plea. I have poured my heart out trying to get anyone to respond. The only people that are in charge, like the only people that can fix this, not a peep. And I said, it's heartbreaking. I'm crumbling right now. And it's like a lot for me to crumble, because elected officials are the parents of a city or a county or a state. And we're sort of like your children, right? And you're supposed to respond to us. And even if there was nothing you could do, if your child was dying and there's nothing you could do, you would still sit with them and you would say, I'm with you. We're going to figure this out. And you're not even doing that. So what is wrong with you? And I just put it in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I tagged like every elected official I knew after that. So I think this must have been November of 2020. Tina Kotek wrote like a comment and she was like, you're right. And I'm sorry that you're alone and we are with you. And just, I mean, she wrote a really heartfelt response. And then I got a phone call from Dan Ryan and I didn't know him. And he said, one of my staff shared this with me. And I just felt like I needed to know the person that wrote this and like was willing to be so vulnerable. And I think it's sort of like grew after that it was like after all of these things growing up of people not telling the truth and people being disingenuous, that I felt like I only knew how to be myself.
Yeah.
And that I'm self-employed, so I'm never going to hide that. There's never a reason that I have to hide that. And that I think in current times, that's really valuable to people, that like no one does that. I tell my kids and my staff all the time, were it not for ego and job security, you could save the world. And I think that people saw like, I have no ego in this and I have no job I'm trying to keep safe. I'm just trying to get some help for myself and for everyone else. So after that, I got a call from Sam Adams. This is before he was in the position he was in. And he's like, they're thinking of having me join. What does the city need? And I was like, fuck if I know. I'll tell you what I need. I was like, I need someone that maybe doesn't have a job title to just enforce anything. I got nothing. Nothing is being enforced. And just to be clear, like emergency responders were at work the whole time. It's just that we lost a large percent of emergency responders.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've spent a lot of time sort of explaining how it works. Like if you create a hostile work environment, people will leave, right? We're all collectively responsible for keeping public servants, right? And so if we are ultimately their employers as the public and we create a hostile work environment, people, they're employees, they can leave.
Mm-hmm.
And they did. A lot of them did. And so there came a point where we were down to 300 patrol officers. So we may have 800 people on staff, but 300 patrol officers. I'm always telling people, so if you don't do scheduling, there are 3 8-hour shifts in a day. So that's 100 people if you work 7 days a week for 650,000 people. So 650,000 people's problems. But you don't work 7 days a week, so you've got about 85. So 85 people to respond to 650,000 people's problems.
You start to do the math, you understand why it's going to take 20 minutes.
Right.
You
right.
know,
It's
your
like,
daughters didn't die.
Right. Did someone die?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a terrible situation to be in, but we have to understand what effects we all have on all of these other individuals. Like everyone is just a person.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of lump people together. I'm sure you've experienced working for yourself. Like people love to put business owners in the box of like, you just care about money,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like people will be like, okay, Jeff Bezos to me. Like, thanks for playing. I don't think so. Right. And it can happen with any profession, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've told people like, I understand. I think the Black Lives Matter movement is the most important social justice movement of our lifetime. And I also think in Portland, Oregon, USA, it really went off the rails and it was hijacked by a different group. And I don't know that Portland knows what it's like in other cities. It's risky and it's complicated to like say all of those things. But the one thing I tell people is that I think that the reason that I've had any success in like moving the needle in the city is that in the 5 dysfunctions of the team, one of them is fearing conflict. And I don't fear conflict, that I always keep showing up at the table. And a lot of people, when they have a disagreement, they're like, unless you philosophically agree with me 100%, I'm not coming back to the table.
Yeah.
And my feeling is I will always show up at the table, and it's going to drive you crazy that I keep showing up. But the solution is more important to me than winning. I just want a solution.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that everyone is approaching it that way.
I've talked about this a lot with different friends. I mean, I thank people in my life that hang with me because I also don't have that same filter around conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, my best friends are the people that will push up against me.
Yeah.
Because so many people will walk from you.
Mm-hmm.
I feel a little conflict, you're done.
Yep.
And to me, conflict is the root really of intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
It means I'm willing to risk my position or being wrong, or I think you're big enough to deal with that you might be wrong,
Mm-hmm.
that I can like sit here with you until we can, either we work it out or we don't. And it's okay to hold that tension
Mm-hmm.
because I love you enough.
Totally. My husband and I went through couples counseling for many years, and I loved our therapist. And she was like, there's a formula for change. She says it's V plus R equals X. So it's vulnerability plus receptivity equals whatever outcome you want, right? So do you want this thing to change, right? Like in policy or whatever, someone's got to be vulnerable. Someone's got to be receptive to that vulnerability. And that is the only path to getting to any sort of change. And
You're saying no one's in charge. What's the plan?
mm-hmm.
At some point, someone, I think from the city, was just like, well, do you have a plan? Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Like or you gave them a deadline. And then at that point, when you saw no action, you moved forward.
Started. So when I talked to Sam, he ended up coming on as, I'm trying to remember his title. It was totally like someone without a job title. It's like director of future opportunities or something. I
Just
can't
get shit done.
Right. I couldn't remember what it was. I was like, nice work with the title. And he called me one day and he was like, are you going to join this call? And it was supposed to be for like educational institutions. And I was like, no, I'm not an educational institution. He's like, I think you should. And Sam, I've known Sam a long time because he used to live in Kenton, and he's been a very dear mentor throughout my growing up here in Portland. And so I'm always like, okay, whatever you ask, Sam. And so I joined the call, and that is what morphed into these problem solver calls. So they started having, over time, they moved to the whole city. But like they started in Old Town, where it was essentially whoever wanted to join this call, there would be some key players from different bureaus, and Sam would lead it. And we'd be like, we got to deal with this particular group over here. They're super violent. We've got a bunch of trash over here. Just like essentially once a week, we would call and report everything. They would come fix it. The next week, we would report everything. And over time, Tom Miller rejoined the mayor's office, and he took over those calls. And in one of the calls, he was like, so the fall bump is coming. So what that is, they have the city budget, and twice a year they reconcile it. And if there's surplus, then that's the bump. So there's extra and people can advocate for it. So he's like, Jesse, here's on one of these calls, he was like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hire these people. We're going to hire these people. And I was like, I do not care. What outcomes will I see?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, that's actually up to you. And I was like, that's ridiculous. And something I've seen consistently in politics here is that there's not a lot of strategy, I guess is the word. Or like when I studied strategic planning, it was like, have you ever heard of SMART goals?
Yeah.
Right. So they're like specific, they're measurable, they're actionable, realistic, and there's a timeline. So I was like, okay, well, you might regret it if I make a plan, but I'll do it. So that's where that 90-day plan was born. Was Old Town has actually had this strategic plan we'd worked on over the years. So I just took some categories from that because I needed the board. I didn't do it unilaterally. Like I wrote it unilaterally, but then I got the board to approve it. And then I brought it back, and Tom, he goes, oh, this is great. And like all these bureaus were like, I think we could do this. Like this doesn't seem controversial at all. And then Tom said, all right, everyone, take this back to your groups and get approval from them, which is like super Portland, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're just going to keep committeeing this. And I said, no, you're not taking this back to anyone. You asked Old Town to write a plan. We wrote a plan. It's approved by the board. We are the official representatives of this neighborhood. This
Mhm.
is the plan. I don't care if anyone else approves it. And he was like, oh God. So, and that's what happened. He said on one call, there's going to be a slight delay in us getting started. And I said on the call, I'm the only person on this call not getting paid in response to the delay. I was like, tell me why I don't go across the street right now, light my building on fire, take the insurance money, and go literally anywhere else.
Yeah.
They were like, okay, we'll get right on it. And then the police called me and they were like, you were on speakerphone. That was hilarious. So anyway, they got started. But I started those press conferences because I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that that was promised to us. So I was like, all right, how do I strategically be sure that this doesn't get forgotten? And so I did this first press conference, which I think was really successful. And that was when sort of the county, they didn't get involved like helpful. The press would ask the county, what do you say about what Jesse just said?
Mm.
And the previous chair, Kafori, would say, Jesse's lying. That's not true. This is everything we've done. And then they would tell me that. And I'm like, schedule the next press conference. You think I say anything without receipts? Right? They'd be like, no, we have a contract with Blanchet House. I had just talked to Blanchet House before the press conference and they're like, we have no contract. We're not going to any more meetings with them. And then they would come back and say, no, we have a contract. Jesse's lying. Right? So it was just trying to like force everyone's hand at doing what they said that they would do. And it's been kind of funny because it's been obviously more than 90 days. It's been like a year and a half since I started it. But I joke that I was like, I swear to God, that list is in the mayor's office somewhere because I'll get random phone calls where they're like, I hear you need a string light permit process for overhead string lights. Let's work on it like a year later. So
they keep bringing it back.
Yeah,
Like, okay.
They're like, all right, did we get this one done? Okay, did we get this? And honestly, I think almost everything is done.
Well, it just goes to so many people in the world are doers, but they need to know what to do.
Mhm.
And I think very few people hold vision. And that's probably why you've been such a successful entrepreneur. I mean, within 90 days that you reduced the tent count by 3/4, you placed almost all willing people into shelters or other supportive programs. Graffiti was nearly totally eliminated and violent crime was dramatically reduced. And your plan, or the plan as it was executed, is now, I think you're going around and helping other neighborhood
Mhm.
associations adopt it.
Yeah. So
Try-
you guys, like you're Central East Side.
Central East Side.
So Sam had me do a little tutorial
Yeah.
for the group here. And then St. John's wanted to do it too. And I just met with the Lloyd group also. I think that what I've seen is, and I told all electeds this, I was like, actually, if you never know what to do, ask a business owner, like
Yeah.
a small business owner, because business owners don't have the luxury of not knowing.
Last week, my head of maintenance was chasing down someone who broke into the office, stole the car keys from a fleet vehicle, and took off.
Mhm.
We have trackers on there. I mean, we know the patterns, how
Mhm.
when we get hit, when the graffiti happens, how quickly we have to turn it around, what are the pressures. I have new employees, they know how to use Narcan
Mhm.
cans, for overdoses. Like, we do not have the luxury of running a business anymore.
Mhm.
We're also narcotic specialists and security specialists. You just don't have the luxury, and you can't get. I mean, what are you going to do?
Well, I mean, I actually mentioned this. I spoke to our representative, Maxine Dexter, about Measure
Mhm.
110. And I said, look, I still support Measure 110, but you guys I always tell people, like, think 3 to 5 steps after, like, what's
Mhm.
going to happen, like any business person would do. Like, if I make this policy, what is every way someone's going to game it? What's every way that it could
Yep.
go sideways? And I was like, you can't just pass a policy. Because she said, well, illicit drugs were always illegal. So we didn't have to have policy for public use and public high. And I'm like, yes, I understand. But your job is to write legislation. So like, work it out, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
you wrote the policy, like we're going to decriminalize possession. You obviously thought through like how much can you possess? You know how much you can possess prior to the most recent update. When they first wrote this, do you know how much fentanyl you can possess?
This is a fun game. Quarter pound.
Well, tell me in quantity of pills.
I don't even know enough about fentanyl. I know a little bit can kill you.
So they're like
pills,
they're
100
like
pills.
40 pills was
40
how
pills.
much you could possess at any given time.
So you could kill an entire 8th grade classroom.
Right. It's
Okay.
300 people could be killed with
Mhm.
40 pills. And that's what you were allowed to have at any given time. They just updated it to 5. But
Nice.
the rationale was because of the number of overdose deaths,
Mhm.
like being too great, which is fair. But I think slightly amusing to me that like we went to such lengths for marijuana policy and like where you can smoke marijuana. So marijuana policy, you can only smoke on private property out of public view. And if you get caught, it's a Class B misdemeanor and a $1,000 fine. If you smoke fentanyl, you can smoke fentanyl and meth anywhere you want, current policy. Like you can't even smoke tobacco in public parks,
Yeah.
but you can smoke meth and fentanyl anywhere you want. And they had to create a new class lower than the lowest class, which was Class D, $250. They made a Class E misdemeanor, $100 penalty. So and I was like, hey, so like one of these is lethal both to the user and to people walking by.
Mm-hmm.
And I like got an internal document from the county that said, because the county employees were concerned about the risks of secondhand fentanyl. The county health authority said there's no known evidence that there are risks to secondhand fentanyl smoke. And I was like, I consider this not a legitimate document.
Mm-mm.
And I said, I just asked ChatGPT to write me a 1-page summary of the risks of secondhand fentanyl smoke with sources. Here you go.
There you go.
We're going to update this document with the CDC and the World Health Organization. I don't know who your sources are, but there are risks.
It's almost like the public sector, like it's a way of thinking that's been so trained that you just like you can't see out of it. Like it's a cul-de-sac you're never driving
The
out
county
of.
especially is a bit of an echo chamber right now. I tell people a lot. The city actually did really show up for us and has, particularly the mayor's office. Like his team more than anyone has shown up. I probably talk to his staff 3 times a week and they respond real time to like, this is what I'm seeing on the ground. And I cannot get the same response from the county or the state. And I think the tide might shift. But what I tell people is City Hall is caught up with public sentiment. The county's a year or 2 behind, and the state is 2 to 3 years behind. Like people are still making policy thinking, oh, we're in these extremist times, and so this is how everyone's going to feel. And I'm like, no. Everyone, the pendulum has swung back already. No one feels safe. Like the way you swing the pendulum, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If our lowest level is not being met of safety, all bets are off. The pendulum is swinging back. You have lost everyone.
Yeah.
And no one feels safe anymore.
All the time I hear people rail on the city and I'm like, that's not even what they do.
That's right.
It's that's the
I actually
county.
testified that once to them. Not because I had anything to testify. I was like, why do you not tell everyone that they're at the wrong meeting? I'm like telling them at my testimony. I'm like, everyone's at the wrong meeting. And actually, and I've been telling a lot of people have been telling everyone, go to the county to testify because no one goes. And then recently, I want to say since this most recent election, a bunch of people have been going to testify and they didn't know what to do because they were like, we don't get a lot of testimony. So like, sorry, we don't really know how to do this with timing.
I think anybody that knows what's happening in the city right now knows who you are, knows that you're a really important player in this. Today on the radio, they were talking about a 45-person task force that's being put together. You know, I had been talking to Nina Bird a few months ago, who's a strategist, and I know there's been a lot of momentum to be like, okay, people, let's get people together and make something happen. So what is this task force and what are you looking forward to contributing there?
I am on the task force and we had our first meeting yesterday. And I mean, it's a good group of people. I'm not I'm really bad with like title. So there are committees. There will be 5 committees that essentially all the work will get done in committee as is appropriate. And then you'll reconvene once a month to sort of go over the plans that are coming out of that. And the titles for some of them, like I'm not exactly sure what they are, because we were given this document that Prosper Portland and the mayor's office and the county funded that was sort of like, how do we move the city forward, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, we've got to get marginalized communities access to capital to open businesses. We've got to get small businesses down here, job training and green tech. Or going in, my thought was like, okay, half this document is about small businesses. I can totally help with this. But the committees were like visioning the future for Portland, and then maybe safety and taxes. And I'm not always like totally sure when it's vague, like visioning Portland.
Yeah.
I'm like, and you get assigned to them. So I haven't gotten my assignment yet. But they also said you can join all of them. I was like, great, I'm going to do that. I have a lot of opinions. I actually knew a little bit in advance, like if there were specific goals or outcomes that were desired. And it was unclear, like it seemed like there weren't specific plans yet. And my husband teases me that he's like, you study this stuff, like whether you want to or not. And for the first time ever, I took all of my notes and put them in a single document of like what the federal government policy could change to, what state, what county, what city, private sector. And it was like specific policy changes based on current policy that I know already exists. And I've actually already floated most of them, but I made a single document. It's like 4 pages, single spaced, and it's separated by jurisdictions. So knowing there might not be anything happening in that first meeting, I just brought copies and I just like handed it out. I was to the governor. I'm like, I need you to deal with the state stuff.
Yeah.
I gave Congressman Blumenauer, I was like, I need you to deal with the federal stuff. I've already talked to Ron Wyden about this. I gave the county, like, you can handle the county section. And there was a moment actually where I think that it might have been like a little tense with the governor planning this for the mayor, because I think it can feel maybe like people think you're not handling it, so they're going to come handle it. I said this at one point, I'm like, I don't know Ted personally. I don't have his phone number. We don't spend time together. But I said, I want to be really clear. Throughout this time, there's only one office that has shown up for us the whole time, which is the mayor's office. And I was like, I'm consistently met with defensiveness and passing the blame from the county. And I don't know where the state is. But rather than criticizing Ted Wheeler, I said, you guys need to be thankful that he has been holding this together and like contorting himself to cover things that are not his jurisdiction, right? Like the county does shelters, the county does mental health and addiction services, like any services, that's the county. But then also the district attorney and the sheriff, which has the jail bed. The police just pick people up, but they cannot make sure people go to jail. So there's a lot of confusion for people about what the mayor does. And it pains me to see people blame him or the city for things that he can't control. Not because I know Ted Wheeler, just as a person. It's like everyone thinking that anything that goes wrong with a business, any business in the city, is like somehow I'm like part of it.
Yeah, right.
Right. Like I didn't want that. And so, I had suggested months ago, like, we need a central database of available shelter beds that's updated real time. I said, I can help you. It's hotel software. And the central database is like a booking.com. The hotel software is an API that feeds into it. They were like, well, what about health data? And I'm like, you think I need my hotel guests' health data? I just need to know your name and when you're coming.
Yeah.
The end. And the mayor's office made one. And it's internal, and they can only access their own shelter. And they have maybe 94 beds, but the county has thousands and they won't participate. You need to have people participating together. And so at the meeting yesterday, I shared not just that the mayor's office has shown up more than anybody, but I was like, you guys can't fight because it's eroding the confidence of the populace. Electeds are the parents of a city or a county or a state. And when you fight, you destabilize the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be, I said, I know I have referenced this and sent you all digital copies of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, but I was like, you guys need to be each other's first team, which means there's no one that splits you, right? Like in the book, they talk about this manager goes back to her team and like starts sharing a little of what's happening in the management meeting. And then one of those employees comes to one of the managers and it's like, oh, I hear such and such got in trouble. And the person doesn't say anything and goes back and says, who told this person? He's like, oh, I'm like their mother hen. I just like to make sure my team feels cared for. And she was like, so that's not how this works.
Mm-mm.
This is your first team. This is where your loyalties lie first. And it doesn't mean you don't care about them, but this is the tier that stays united no matter what. And I was like, in the meeting, I'm like, I will send all of you digital copies of this book. I just need everyone to read this and get it together.
It's Lencioni, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. It's one of the best, being that gets quoted all the time in entrepreneurial circles.
Right.
Like anyone who runs a business that has a team knows.
Silly story. If you read the story, it's sort of silly, but the concept, the pyramids, like it's important. And I just felt it was important to say in front of all of these people, like, you have made the wrong villain here.
Exactly.
That is not fair. And you need to be thanking him for pulling your weight because everyone else has not been pulling their own weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not fair. And he's not even said anything. Right? Like,
so interesting. Time and time again, the people I talk to that whether they've worked for him or work, with him have, at the end of the day, most people have a lot of respect.
Of course, he's
for him
super
and
smart.
What he's done. Yeah.
He's very compassionate. I wrote to him later and I was like, I just want you to know I appreciate you not letting us drown.
Yeah.
Because no one else has responded.
Yeah.
I mean, like City Hall responds, but like I've written to everybody. I've called everyone.
Yeah.
And like, thank you for not letting us drown.
You could just like whisper in every Portlander's ear one thing. Is it, a piece of education? Is it a piece of knowledge? Is it like, do this?
Mm-hmm. I don't totally know, but I think one thing I always tell my kids and my staff is that it's easy to be an extremist and it's lazy to be an extremist. It's hard to be moderate and to look at information and be measured about it and calculated. And it's sheer laziness that makes people extreme. And the other, I've said this at I think all of the press conferences I've done, is that I come to the table assuming everyone is compassionate and everyone is progressive, meaning they just want things to be better than before, right? I don't get in the weeds about people's politics.
Who they vote for.
Right. Like I generally like everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is I'm curious about everyone. And I really believe that people care. And if you come in guns a-blazing, making assumptions about people from the jump, you will make zero progress in that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So to just like be curious, try and understand, try and find where you can have common ground with people to move the conversation forward. I'm always like, if I'm stranded on a desert island with this person, like I can't spend the whole time fighting. So we better find something that we agree on so that we can like keep talking.
Early in the summer read Arthur Brooks' Love Your Enemies.
Mm.
And it's so good. And he's a conservative think tank thinker and writer. I really love a lot of his books and his writing. And the thing he said that you can never recover from personal relationship politics is contempt.
Mm.
The minute someone thinks you just have contempt for them, they're shut off. It's like an animal reaction.
It's the same with couples counselors in Seattle.
The Gottmans.
Yeah. So they talk about the 4 horsemen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And contempt is the one that you can't overcome either.
We're sitting here in the Central East Side. We're on 10th and Stark. We have the Soho Club being built kitty corner to us.
Yeah.
And as someone who was born and raised in Portland, sometimes that's hard for me to marry up the fact that what I'm seeing going around here on these blocks and the struggles we're having are happening at the exact same time, but that's how things happen,
Mm-hmm.
with Soho Club going in, which is like most exclusive, members only hotel, rooftop pool. And, and it's this convergence of all things.
Mhm.
So it is reminding me every day that I need to take off my Portland lenses, wipe them, and try to look at the city from a bigger lens, because
Yeah.
that's how people are moving in. And I've seen this happen so many inflection points in Portland where people can see what we cannot. We're
Mhm.
so busy eating each other alive that people come in and build things like the whole Slabtown neighborhood, which
Mhm.
is owned by outside California investors. It's beautiful. We're all as Portlanders living going down there. And that was not done by us.
Mhm.
That was done with people with outside vision for
Yeah.
what our city was going to be. As someone who owns hotels, you see people coming in, you're a real estate investor. What do you see as far as real estate plays in Portland, or maybe even in the greater state, of like areas you think are ready to pop, or that people are looking at as really fertile ground for next big investments?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the whole central city is for sale right now.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of the big property owners. Everything's always for sale, even if it's not for sale.
Mhm.
And that I've told them, because they don't want to lease for too low a rents and have a contract, because as long as it's unleased, but at a higher rate, you can sort of feign your way through what your property value is, right?
Yeah, with the bank.
Right. But I think that people in the entire central city, which is southwest and northwest, there's a ton for sale. And even if it's not for sale, it's for sale. And the city will recover. And to own real estate in downtown, we're as big as San Francisco, and people don't know it. We're bigger than New Orleans, and people don't know it. And I think that the future of this city, I've been telling everyone, the struggles we're going through are growing pains. That, yes, it's the pandemic. Yes, it's all sorts of things. But Portland has been trying to become a big city for 20 years, and people have resisted. And now those people are not coming downtown. And so it's going to happen without them. And it's okay that I think it can be a really interesting and fun big city. I'm not actually sure why anyone resisted it, but that when it recovers, you will have prime real estate downtown,
Yeah.
So as far as within the city, that's what I see. Everyone is already investing outside of the city. Like Vancouver is like the most valuable real estate right now. And really anywhere outside of the central city.
So thank you so much for sharing the journey of how you got here, the hotels, and how are things going now?
Well, Bingen is doing great because Portlanders love to leave Portland. So that's good. And we have a lot of folks from Seattle coming down. So the retreat sort of escape the city model is working pretty well. In Portland, our guests are usually tourists. And while tourism has recovered, like flights to Portland is recovered about like 95%, people are avoiding staying in the central city. So we've been pretty flat at about 70% of what we were in 2019 numbers. And that's across the board. It's not just us. So people are staying at the airport. They're staying in Vancouver. Our reputation isn't doing great right now. So we're working on it. But we're optimistic. It'll get better.
You and I were at both at an event. You were speaking, and also James Jesse from Travel Portland was speaking, and he was saying the same thing that you were saying, is like travel back to Portland has recovered, but actual Portlanders, like getting away for a night, getting away from the kids, having an affair with your husband in a downtown hotel, that's at 30%.
Yes.
So we have the world looking at Portland saying like, what a great place to go and travel. Right. And we ourselves still are not leaving.
That's true.
Our
right.
houses.
So they just shared this data. Econ Northwest shared this data with us yesterday at the governor's task force that office foot traffic is down like, I think it was 50% or something like that. And then like just regular Portlander visitorship is only at like 33% of what it was, or 38% of what it was in 2019. And I know why, but I do think that there's a need for like a feeling of ownership and responsibility towards your city. I'll hear a lot of people say, you know, I'll go back when it's better, which I understand. But it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg where like we need people to be there so that it gets better. There's better behavior. What I try to explain to people is I need people on the sidewalk that understand what normal behavior is so that if there are enough of those people, then abnormal behavior would not happen. Right. So like I always joke that I don't let elected officials in the building in Portland. I make everyone sit outside with me. And usually they're super scared. And I wasn't with an elected, I was with a city employee, and we were sitting outside, and she heard this clinging sound, and she's like, "Are they hammering the sidewalk?" And I was like, "Look across the street, look in their hand. They're sharpening a machete."
Oh yeah, he used to camp outside my building.
Yeah. And I was like, so this would be abnormal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I need more people that exhibit normal behavior. And if there's a critical mass of us, then we could outnumber the abnormal behavior, right? So that's what I'm going for here, is just outnumbering the abnormal behavior.
3 or 4 weeks ago, I was emceeing at Darcel's for the
for the
world's longest drag show, and I have to say, I parked the car at 3 a.m. in Old Town, not very close, and I felt really safe. And I got back at daylight back to the car, and still felt really safe. And it was one of those moments for me of like, oh yeah, because I used to hang out down there a lot, you know, playing the punk band and shows. And
I will say it is safer at night in Old Town.
Yeah.
like 9 to 5, it is like apocalyptic. And I got picked up by an Uber yesterday, and I was like, "Have you ever visited the apocalypse?" And
welcome.
He was like, and then I had to take an Uber back, and the guy was like, "Have you been to this neighborhood before? I just want to like give you a heads up." I'm like, every day, all day, I own a building down here.
You're like, motherfucker, they're going to put a statue of me down here.
That will promptly get knocked over, but by all the people that are mad at me.
Awesome. And then for our listeners, they want to reach out, book a night at the Society Hotel, get a little time away, or check you out, learn more. Where can they do that?
Yes. So you should definitely not email me about reservations. You should go to the website, which is thesocietyhotel.com. There are 2 directions. You can go to Portland or you can go to Bingen. Our Portland location is in Old Town on Northwest 3rd and Davis, right across the street from Darcel's, which is our claim to fame there. And that one was our original location. It was a hotel for sailors. That's why it was built, because we were a seaport here, and a lot of the hotels in Portland were run by gangsters seeking to exploit sailors. Ours was like the YMCA for sailors, so a lot of good karma there. And we have a rooftop deck. Every Wednesday night, we've been doing something called Summer Sets, where there's either a DJ or a live musician up on the roof from 7 to 10. And then our other location is in Bingen, Washington. It's the only thing in Bingen, Washington that you can stay at, so you'll find it. But that one is a much bigger property, so it's an old schoolhouse and gymnasium. And then we bought the baseball field next to it and built 20 cabins and a spa. So that has a hot pool, a warm pool, a cold plunge, and a sauna. And we hired an esthetician to provide facials for people.
Nice.
That one, it's a little further out. It's super beautiful. Right across, it's the Hood. You cross the Hood River Bridge to get to Bingen.
My husband and I love going to that hotel in Bingen. That's where my mom lives. We're not staying with her. We go in there. And your hotel downtown for people who love like old Portland and architecture and just want to see something done right, like done well. If you're remodeling, you're renovating, you need inspiration. It is absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today with me. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for everything that you're doing for our city.
You got it. Thank you.
Thanks again to Jessie Burke, for all that she does for Old Town and our city. Make sure you check out the Society Hotel the next time you're looking for a cool place to stay or a rad getaway in the Columbia River Gorge. Join me next time, where I'll be sharing the unique story of how I held a matchmaking contest that led to me meeting my husband. It's something I get asked about all the time, and I think you'll find it incredibly interesting. See you then. Enjoy, Janelle.